Connection from ringers off.
Hello, everybody. Somehow I forgot to show the promo. So here it is. Fight over the relief bill goes on is the topic for tonight. Anyway, hi to all who have come. And there's Dolores. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Lana. Thank you for sharing to Twitter. Troy, hi. Says he prefers to watch on YouTube. Hi, Terry Burke. Good to see you. Hello, Kay. And hello, Troy, on YouTube. He says, hi, Bonnie. Elbow cough, good vibes. And Lana says, should we take bets when the $1,400 will start to be received? Sure. I suspect it will start to be received maybe April 15th or something like that. Terry says, hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
Troy says, that CPAC stage design, geez Louise. That was really something, wasn't it? Old Gringo says, July, Lana. Jay says, watch the 3-hour special from Our Revolution earlier on the new voting rights bill. It was great. Learned a lot. Hope they pass. Well, we got to do more than hope. We got to work to get them passed. And by the way, as I said last night, they ain't passing without getting rid of the filibuster. Neither of them. Old Gringo says, ta-da, the promo. And Lana Del Hicks the Clock says, July. How many people will be ousted from their homes by then? Shake my head. Well, probably the eviction moratorium is going to go into effect. But I think the real question is, when the moratorium expires in September, what's going to happen then? If their debts, their rent debts are not forgiven, they're going to be evicted from their homes anyway because they'll never have enough money to pay the rent back. The rent bill will be much too high for any of them to pay back. Gina Marie is here. Hi, Gina Marie on Facebook. Nice to see you. Terry says, open Smart News and read. Senate Republicans threaten to delay passage of COVID-19 relief bill. Well, that's interesting. If they do that, then it seems to me that what the Democrats ought to do is to plaster that all over the internet, all over the web, and say, remember who delayed your relief bill, remember who delayed your stimulus checks. And remember, and by the way, the only reason why we had to do reconciliation in the first place and why it took so long was that not a single one of them was going to vote for our relief bill anyway. So that's why it's taken until now to come close to getting it out. And now they say they're going to delay passage? They were delaying passage from the very beginning. That's the truth, by the way, and that's what should be told. Steve Gunza says, sorry about my previous drunk chatter. I hurt my back trying unsuccessfully to rush my limp dog to the hospital, so I'm in a lot of physical and mental pain. Sorry, Steve. Sorry to hear that. And Lana says, April 15th, still too late for many people. Oh, yeah, too late. And Troy says, the elbow cough is supposed to be a dance. And Lana says, yes, the back rent needs to be canceled. And Terry says, $1,400 is not nearly enough for renters to buy a car to live in. That's true. It has to be a very old car. And old cars are costing a lot these days. Okay. First thing I'd like you to take a look at tonight is something new on the radar, which hasn't gotten much covered today. Could be because there's nothing to it. Oh, it's the No Excuses PAC. It's run by Corbin Trent and Shoykat Chakrabarti, who you may remember at one time was chief of staff, for AOC. Quite a bright guy. Anyway, I'm going to share the screen now, and I want you to take a look at this thread. This is a Twitter thread from Nick Knudsen, who has a social media group. Why am I not showing what I contracted for here? I don't know. Why did it not come up? Oh, here it is. There it is. Here's the thread from Threadreader. As of this morning, Nick Knudsen says, this fucking news is getting buried, he says. The Senate is bucking the parliamentarian and will push the $15 minimum wage back into the COVID relief bill. This, as we shall see in just a moment, is a little bit of a mistake, as Nick himself is about to prove. Democrats are going to bat for the American people. This is complicated, so let me do my best to explain. There's a tweet from Jeff Stein. Several senior Dems, including Schumer, Murray, and Wyden, joining Sanders, expected to offer an amendment to Biden's relief bill identical to the Raise the Wage Act to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour per person, a familiar. I don't know why the familiar was added, but to Jeff Stein's tweet. But anyway, Knudsen goes on. After the Senate parliamentarian ruled that the $15 minimum wage was ineligible to be included in the reconciliation bill, the general consensus was that only VP Harris could step in to overrule the judgment and keep the $15 in the bill. Based on what I'm hearing from people familiar with the discussion within the Senate since the ruling came down, the consensus changed. There is very little precedent for this type of situation, says Nick. In his third tweet, he says, Schumer and the Democrats determined that the committee chair at Senator Sanders' could in fact push the bill out and disregard the advice of the parliamentarian. And at J.I. Wallner, a former Senate staffer and procedural expert, now with the conservative at RSI. RSI stands for the R Street Institute here in D.C. He agreed here, and then he said in his tweet, James Wallner said, Legislative Procedure 101. Only the House and Senate can make changes to legislation. The Senate's parliamentarian can take provisions out of a House-passed bill. Its majority leader cannot remove a provision. The president can't do it. The VP can't do it. Only the full Senate, he tweets. And then Knudsen goes on and says, ultimately, Democrats were needlessly boxing themselves in based on scant precedent. Led by Senator Sanders on this, they're blazing a new trail of precedent instead. Then there's tweet 5. So the Senate Budget Committee will vote on and advance the hashtag American Rescue Plan with the $15 an hour minimum wage included. From my understanding, the only way that it can be taken out after that is for 60 senators to join together and vote it out of the bill. What he's saying here is that to amend a reconciliation bill that is advanced to the floor, 60 votes are needed because the filibuster rule is still in effect for anything not in the reconciliation bill. Maybe that's the basis on which the Republicans are threatening to delay the bill now. This now becomes somewhat of a game of chicken with Sinema and Manchin, who have said they won't support $15. And Knudsen said, this is a bold play for Democrats, but it's the right thing to do. Give them each an earmark and get it done. Lifting wages for tens of millions is worth it. And tweet 7. We're going to need all hands on deck to highlight the need for $15 and the hashtag American Rescue Plan. There needs to be as much pressure as possible. If Democrats win this, it will be a huge win and promise kept for all of them. Join our social media messaging team. Join the hashtag Fight for 15 social media team. Please help us push for a $15 an hour minimum wage. It's now or never. And the link, is there. So, I replied to that particular tweet. But first, I want to be clear with you about what that tweet or that series of tweets actually seems to be saying. If we look at Wallner's tweet here, that this whole Twitter thread is based on, it says only the House and Senate can make changes to legislation. I agree. Parliamentarian can't take any provisions out. Neither can the majority leader, neither can the president, neither can the VP. Only the full Senate can do it. Neither can the chairperson of the Budget Committee, Senator Sanders. The House bill, the assumption here, And I have to say, I don't know if this assumption is correct. I've been trying to clear it up today, but I think it is correct that since the reconciliation bills in both houses of Congress are structured to match each other, and the reconciliation bills in the House are crafted by the Budget Committee in the House. The framework is crafted by the Budget Committee in the House. The framework is crafted by the Budget Committee in the Senate. But the committee that aggregates all changes to these bills, all amendments to these bills, and that actually does the processing to the floor are the budget committees in both houses. So right now, the committee that has the House-passed bill is, it seems to me, Bernie Sanders' committee, the Budget Committee in the Senate. Right now, the House-passed bill that's under consideration in the committee has the minimum wage provision in it. Not only that, as will be relevant for later on in this live stream, it also has the House provisions for eligibility to receive the stimulus payments in it. Those criteria for eligibility were the same ones that applied to the previous Trump checks that came out, the stimulus payments coming from the time of the Trump administration, including the $600 stimulus payment, $1,200 for couples. So the point being, these are the provisions that currently exist in the bill that has been passed to the Senate. Now, in the Budget Committee, if people want to amend that bill, then they either have to propose amendments on the floor or they have to propose amendments to the Budget Committee, and those would have to be passed through the Budget Committee and would have to be put on the floor when the bill is put on the floor, and I'll bet would have to be part of the vote-a-rama, which is supposed to occur tomorrow in the Senate. But until that vote-a-rama occurs, we do not know whether any changes at all have been made to the House bill. In fact, no changes at all will be able to occur until there's voting by the full Senate. There can be amendments, I suppose, collected by the Budget Committee in the Senate that are the recommended amendments by the Budget Committee to this bill. But I don't believe the Budget Committee has the authority to change the bill itself, the House bill itself, and then send that amended bill to the floor. It can only send, I believe, the House bill to the floor and then have that bill amended by the whole Senate if the whole Senate agrees to do it. That's what I think is the meaning of Wallner's tweet. So some of Knutson's thread appears to be wrong in a sense. He says the Senate is bucking the parliamentarian and will push the $15 minimum wage back into the COVID relief bill. No, it has never been out of the COVID relief bill. If I'm right, it is not out of it now. It is still in the COVID relief bill. Bernie has been saying that he has to put an amendment to the floor to the COVID relief bill. I don't think he has to put an amendment to the floor. All he has to do is to call for a vote of the existing House relief bill. And then there will be a vote on that whole relief bill, including the minimum wage. Now, having said that, I tweeted a reply to Knudsen. And what I said in this reply, I'll now share with you. And I'm sure you can see this. Hope you can see it well enough. You should be able to. I'll do this for you, and you may be able to see it a little better there. I asked the question, are you sure that the Senate Budget Committee has jurisdiction over the reconciliation bill? If so, why was Bernie saying he would have to amendment to put the mini wage back in? Didn't he understand that all he had to do was prevent its being struck from the bill? And I tagged by Warren Gunnels, the famous assistant to Bernie Sanders. He's the majority staff director for the budget chairman at Senator Sanders. I tried to get him to enlighten me on this question. I didn't get any answers from Knudsen, and let me verify that. And I didn't get any answers from Warren Gunnell. The thread doesn't seem to have proceeded beyond that. Okay, I think that's it. I don't think there have been any answers unless I recently got some answers. Let me see. Someone like, oh, that was what Mark was doing. Was retweeting Lana's call for people to join us for tonight. So that was good. So the point is, again, that I was trying to get clarification on this. But if I'm right, and if the bill is being pushed out by the Budget Committee, the minimum wage provision is still in the House bill, which is now being considered by the Senate through its process. And not only is the minimum wage still in the bill, but the House provisions for eligibility for the stimulus payments are still in there too. So let me share the next piece. This is a quote from Matthew Bruenig. Okay, Matt Bruenig. And Matt is someone who's not popular among the MMTers, but who still is a very incisive thinker, though he doesn't seem to have grasped the main points, okay, of MMT. Okay, but nevertheless, he's a progressive. And he says, the parliamentarian does not decide bird rule questions. And there she is, Elizabeth McDonough. Must have been a birthday party or something. She's getting clapped. Anyway, she expressed her opinion that a provision to gradually increase the minimum wage, $15 an hour, is not allowed under the reconciliation rules established in the Congressional Budget Act. That was the act of 1974 that led to the formulation of the Byrd Rule. This set off a debate about whether the Vice President, who is also the President of the Senate and the presiding officer of the Senate, should overrule the parliamentarian on this question. As a matter of simple language, it's fine, of course, to talk about the parliamentarian doing a ruling and then shift the question to whether the ruling should be overruled. But this common way of discussing the topic may also be confusing people about the nature of the parliamentarian's authority. The section of the Congressional Budget Act that governs this part of the reconciliation process never mentions the parliamentarian. Instead, it states quite clearly that when a senator raises a point of order, that a provision contains extraneous matter. Quote, the presiding officer may sustain the point of order as to some or all of the provisions against which the senator raised the point of order. The presiding officer is the Vice President of the United States, which is Kamala Harris. She has the sole authority to sustain or dismiss a point of order. The parliamentarian has no formal rule at all. I have to clarify this here. The presiding officer has the sole authority. If Kamala Harris is there on the day the point of order is brought up and is the presiding officer, then she has the sole authority. But if Kamala Harris, for some reason, is not in the House or chooses not to be in the House at the time, in the Senate, at the time, then the president pro tempore, who is Patrick Leahy, the other Vermont senator, and a friend of Bernie Sanders, and also one of the more progressive senators in the Senate, he would be the presiding officer of the Senate in her absence, and he would have the authority to sustain or dismiss the point of order. The parliamentarian would still have no formal role at all, as Matt says in this article. When people say that the parliamentarian ruled that the minimum wage hike violates the Byrd Rule, what they are saying is that the parliamentarian has declared that she would advise the presiding officer to sustain a point of order that claimed that the minimum wage hike, quote, produces changes in outlays or revenues which are merely incidental to the non-budgetary component of the provision, unquote. The presiding officer does not have to defer to the parliamentarian's opinion on how to rule on the point of order, nor should the presiding officer take that advice where the question is how to interpret a vague phrase in the Congressional Budget Act. This is the new thing that Matt is contributing to this discussion. That it is a vague phrase in the Congressional Budget Act. Doesn't even mention the parliamentarian. There's nothing about whether the presiding officer should take that advice, or whether anybody in the Senate should take the advice of the parliamentarian. People who object to having Harris exercise the judgment that the statute requires her to exercise claim that this would cause some kind of dangerous political escalation. And quote, notice this is Matt quoting somebody. Quote, it would mean that henceforth all rules in the Senate are subject to the blatantly partisan interpretation of the VP who is following the dictates of the president, unquote, says Gregory Koger, who's a political scientist at the University of but Miami, which, by the way, last time I looked, was not known as one of the finer schools in the country. But he is the author of the book, Filibustering. By the way, that last was not a quote from that, but my quotation about political scientists who serve at that particular university. A cheap shot, I know. Cogar's objection, which lots of Senate rules wonks share, is that at least when you change the rules, you change them for everyone. Simply commanding the vice president to stop enforcing them creates a Senate where anything goes. Quote, this would represent a tremendous escalation of partisanship in the Senate and of presidential control over the Senate, unquote, Cogar says. And Matt says, but this is completely demented. Having the presiding officer rule on points of order is no less anarchic than having the parliamentarian rule on them. Either one could rule correctly or incorrectly, intentionally or unintentionally, in good faith or in bad faith. The idea of a neutral rules adjudicator, especially when it comes to a rule that is impossibly vague, is pure fantasy. Furthermore, nobody is saying that Harris should, quote, stop enforcing, unquote, the rules of the Congressional Budget Act. They are saying that she should use her own judgment about whether a minimum wage hike that increases outlays by $74 billion and revenues by $20 billion is a provision that, quote, produces changes in outlays or revenues which are merely incidental to the non-budgetary components of the provision, unquote. If she thinks, she, being Harris, not the parliamentarian, if she thinks that is, quote, merely incidental, unquote, then she should say so and sustain the point of order objecting to its inclusion. If she thinks it is not, then she should not sustain it. What she should not do is pretend like her hands are tied by some other person with no authority saying that they read that phrase as excluding the minimum wage. It is not the parliamentarian's call. It never has been the parliamentarian's call. It is Harris's call, and if the provision is stripped out of the reconciliation bill, it would be her fault. What did I tell you yesterday? I told you it would be on her, on Biden, on Manchin, and on Sinema. That is what I told you. And I said, especially on Harris, because she had the constitutional role to preside over the Senate and to make this call. It is not the parliamentarian's call. It is the parliamentarian's call to give advice. And further, let me point out that if I'm right about the House bill still residing in the Budget Committee, and if it is that bill that is put out to the floor by the chair of the Budget Committee for amendments, for consideration and for amendments, for the amendment process, then whether or not that stays in the bill is either something that the chair of the Budget Committee has a lot to say about or doesn't have anything to say about. Now, the chair of the Budget Committee might have nothing to say about it if this is a routine function where the House bill is simply put up for amendments in the Senate on the floor. But if it turns out that Bernie has some discretion in this matter, then the House bill would not automatically go to the floor, but it could certainly go out to the floor if Bernie wills it. If Bernie could bring his committee along, he could put the House bill on the floor with chapter and verse as it stands now, with the minimum wage bill in it, and with the eligibility criteria of the House within that bill. He can get that out on the floor. And that means there are going to have to be votes on whether that bill is going to be amended or not. And not only that, it is quite likely that at the point that bill goes to the floor, that someone in either party, it might be Joe Manchin, it might be Kyrsten Sinema, it might be a Republican friend of theirs, that raises the point of order so they don't have to do it. But whoever raises the point of order will be calling on not the parliamentarian, but the presiding officer to make a decision. And if Harris chooses not to stay away from the Senate on that day, it will be her responsibility to make that ruling for or against the point of order. If she decides against the point of order could then only be overturned by 60 votes in the Senate. It could not be overturned by a majority vote. So therefore, you would need the 50 Republicans to overturn it and 10 of the Democrats. And you'll never get 10 Democrats to go on record overturning keeping the minimum wage in this particular bill. What I'm saying here is if I'm right and that bill is under the jurisdiction of the Budget Committee right now, it's probably going to be up to Bernie to put the intact bill onto the floor, not to make amendments to this bill before it hits the floor, where the amendments are going to come thick and fast, and the voting is going to come thick and fast in the vote-a-rama tomorrow. I'm saying I think it's going to be Bernie's prerogative to put this in there. Now, I don't know whether Knudsen is right about how Schumer is going to be supporting the minimum wage. He might be. He might be, because it's going to look good for him in terms of fending off a primary challenge from AOC, who's been very critical this week about the moves of the administration on this bill. We'll be going over another criticism of hers just a little bit later. But certainly, she's been very critical of the moves to give up on the minimum wage, as have almost all the progressives in the House. So, it may be that Bernie can still fight for this, that he's not just blowing smoke. It may be that he can force a floor vote. It may be that he can force Manchin and Sinema to decide whether they'll vote for the bill as is or vote against the bill and force it to go down. If they force it to go down, they're going to be dead pigeons in their state. They're going to be deader than two ugly ducklings. Believe me. Their careers are going to be over. Because this bill is popular. And the minimum wage provision, is popular. And what Biden has been trying to do to this bill by tightening the eligibility provisions for the direct payment and by kicking the minimum wage out of that bill These things are not popular. His dealing with these two Democrats is not popular. His failing to subject them to a floor vote is not popular. No, not at all. Next, we come to the issues on the eligibility provisions. A piece in Common Dreams from today. This piece is by Jake Johnson. Quote, madness, unquote. In cave to right-wing Dems, Biden agrees to further limit eligibility for direct payments. Now, I can't say enough of this. About a week ago, supposedly Biden had closed the door on further limits to eligibility. What the hell is he doing having further calls and talks with Sinema and Manchin about this? What is he doing? What does he gain from this? I don't understand. Here's the article. This is a developing news story. Check back for possible updates. There was no update when I opened this up. In the face of pressure from a faction of conservative Senate Democrats, President Joe Biden reportedly agreed Wednesday to limit eligibility for direct relief payments by accelerating the phase-out of $1,400 checks proposed in the coronavirus relief package, $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. Under the new eligibility structure, according to the WAPO, individuals earning $75,000 or less annually and couples earning $150,000 or less will still receive full $1,400 payments, as proposed by the relief package passed by the House last week. But under the latest framework pushed by conservative Dems and accepted by Biden, who, by the way, doesn't have any direct power to rewrite a Senate bill, right? And certainly not a reconciliation bill, where the House and the Senate have agreed on a framework. The phase-out of the $1,400 checks will end at $80,000 for individuals, as opposed to the, we'll go into the $80,000 for individuals and $160,000 for joint filers, meaning individuals and couples who earn more will receive nothing, not even partial payments. The House bill proposes ending the phase-out at $100,000 in yearly income for individuals and $200,000 for couples. So, among the Senate Democrats who pushed for the quicker phase-out was Senators Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, and Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat, of New Hampshire. Well, I can tell you right now, Jeanne Shaheen is not going to vote against this bill. Not a chance in hell she would vote against this bill if Biden just said no to her. She doesn't. She's in no position to torpedo the $1,400 checks for everybody else. She's not that popular in West Virginia that even if she believes in some obscure principle here, that she would dare to do that. She would dare to do that. She's responding to a little worry that some right-wing Republican is going to run against her in 2022 and attack her for being fiscally irresponsible. You think some Trumpster from New Hampshire is going to run against her for being fiscally irresponsible? I mean, don't make me laugh. if she's interviewed on television about that and she doesn't break out into a 5-minute fit of laughter, she doesn't know what the hell she's doing. Because that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard coming out of the mouth of a Trumpster who'd voted for a $1.9 trillion tax cut for the rich. Come on. Anyway, there's a Dem source who said that Biden agreed to that. But I'm telling you, Biden doesn't have any direct influence on that. No direct influence on that. It's passed the House. By the way, Nancy Pelosi, Biden gave a speech to the House Democrats today. And in the speech, he complimented Nancy Pelosi. And he explicitly said that every piece of that bill, every provision of that bill was needed for the American people. Every single provision. And that was done right by Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats, without, of course, bothering to mention that one of those provisions that he thought was completely appropriate and needed right now by the American people for relief was the minimum wage provision. Well, was he lying when he said that to Nancy Pelosi today on a call? Or was he lying when the source said that he agreed to this constriction of the eligibility standards on this particular in connection with the relief bill? Bonnie, under the House bill, the IRS would be directed to base eligibility for payments on 2020 income for those whose returns are on file. Quote, otherwise, the eligibility would be based on their 2019 tax returns, which would have nothing to do with what happened under COVID, but they'd still be supposedly making a targeting judgment. Quote, this is not targeting, Matt Bruenig said last month. He said, it is the illusion of targeting, an illusion that will end up hurting tens of millions of people who are currently in need, but were not in 2019. An analysis by the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy finds that the new eligibility framework adopted by Senate Democrats with Biden's support would result in around 12 million fewer adults and 5 million fewer children receiving direct relief payments than would have gotten them under the House plan. So, 17 million people don't get the full amount of their relief payments because of this supposed compromise that Biden said he would make. And the note here, the Senate is expected to begin voting on its version of the $1.9 trillion relief package as early as Wednesday afternoon. I'm not sure what they voted on this afternoon, but I don't think the amendments occurred this afternoon. Might be wrong about that. Robert Cruikshank, campaign director at the advocacy group Demand Progress, pointed out Wednesday that under the new eligibility structure, some people who got checks when Trump was president won't get them now that Biden is president. And Cruikshank added, there's no upside to this, only the massive downside of handing Congress to the Republicans next year. And he said, madness, madness. And he was echoed in that sentiment by none other than AOC. AOC followed up, also covered by Common Dreams and Jake Johnson. AOC warns Biden that giving relief checks to fewer people than Trump would be nonsensical, quote, own goal, unquote. And we'll get a more fulsome quote from AOC as we go through this post. She strongly pushed back against a move by Senate Democrats and President Joe Biden to further restrict a number of people who will receive direct payments under the emerging coronavirus aid package, warning the new eligibility structure would deny direct relief to people who received checks during Donald Trump's presidency. Well, they might have actually gotten the checks after the presidency of Trump was over, but those checks would have had Trump's name on them, by the way, because they would have been written earlier than that. It just would have taken them longer to arrive because of Trump's frickin' post office. Quote, I don't understand the political or economic wisdom in allowing Trump to give more people relief checks than a Democratic administration. People went far too long without relief last year, unquote. The New York Democrat said to the Washington Post's Jeff Stein, quote, if anything, we should be more generous, not more stingy, of course. Quote, it's also an insensitive compromise for the roughly 80% of Americans that live in urban areas which are known for higher costs of living, unquote, Ocasio-Cortez added. And right again she is. According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP, the new eligibility framework pushed by conservative Senate Democrats and accepted by the party leadership and the president would result in around 12 million fewer adults and 5 million fewer children receiving direct payments compared to the eligibility structure composed by the actually proposed by the House. And she tweeted, conservative Dems have fought so for the Biden administration since fewer and less generous relief checks than the Trump administration did. It's a move that makes little or no political or economic sense, targets an element of relief that is most tangibly felt by everyday people, an own goal. That is to say, it's a goal where one owns oneself. That's crazy. And Jeff Stein tweeted, 280 million people overall would still be eligible for payments, ITEP says. So in other words, with the 17 million people added in there would be 297 million people eligible for payments. That is fantastic. And they want to cut that down to 280 million for no reason. Ocasio-Cortez added, we have a responsibility to show people in this country what a Democratic majority can do for working people. That means more generous relief checks, $15 an hour minimum wage, ending the filibuster, protect our democracy. It's a once-in-a-generation shot, and we need to legislate like it, unquote. On the Senate Democrats' newly adopted framework, and we've been over that already, they're trying to phase out the House rules, and they want to completely deny payments to individuals earning between $80,000 and $100,000 annually, and married couples earning between $160,000 and $200,000 annually. That's the 17 million people. As the New York Times reported, scroll down too fast. The change in the upper limit being discussed in the Senate, if adopted, would mean some people who got a check during Trump's administration would not get one under Biden. Nearly 9 million households that would receive at least some amount of payment under the House bill would not receive any payment at all, the Times noted, citing an estimate from tax modeling specialist Kyle Pomerleau of the American Enterprise Institute, a right-wing think tank. He said the eligibility change would slash around 15 to 20 billion off the top line cost of the relief legislation, a small fraction of the $1.9 trillion total. And Waleed Shahid tweeted, he added to this controversy, there are many things I don't understand about this move, but one is that this would likely ensure that many of the oft-discussed but middle-class suburbanites who flipped from Trump to Biden will have received stimulus checks from Trump, but not from Biden. Isn't that wonderful, folks? Doesn't that make a lot of political sense? And Brian Beutler, editor-in-chief of Crooked Media, called the eligibility rollback and, quote, an absurd, stupid decision, unquote, not to put too fine a point on it, echoing AOC's concern about the possible political consequences of millions of people being denied direct relief payments under Biden and the Democratic Congress after receiving checks under Trump. It should be pretty straightforward to tabulate the number of Democratic voters in Georgia who will not get their supplemental $1,400 checks under this plan and compare it to the vote margins in the Ossoff and Warnock case. Beutler tweeted, referring to the two senators whose electoral victory in January handed Democrats control of the Senate. Or to be more precise, the number of voters who will be getting no supplemental check at all, who was supposed to get one somewhere on the sliding scale. So this is crazy. And as Jayapal said, it's bad policy and bad politics too. And we kind of all agree that it's idiotic policy. Idiotic. What could be possibly motivating this idiotic policy and idiotic politics both? What kind of idiotic person? Now, I'm going to tell you something the Biden administration did do today that was not idiotic. It moved teachers up on the scale of people who are to get priority in getting the vaccine for the coronavirus. I'll bet you Jill had something to do with that. I'll bet you she said to Joe, look, you can't expect these teachers to go back to class and be unprotected against the COVID virus because you want to open up schools, Joe? You can't possibly expect the teachers to do that. I don't know how she put it to him, but I'd be very surprised if she kept silent about that. Because from the beginning, it was totally exploitive and totally unfair to ask the teachers, many of whom are over 50, to go back into the classrooms without vaccine protection. Of course, the Republicans didn't care about that. But that was one area where Democrats ought to be distinguishing themselves from the Republicans. I'm glad to see they are, that Joe Biden at least took this step. Credit where credit is due. But this compromise with Manchin and Shaheen, this is ridiculous. By the way, there were no more names mentioned in that article. Didn't Sinema care about this? Or had she decided to withdraw her opposition and go along with the bill as long as she thought the minimum wage was out? Anyway. Next is a piece from Ryan Cooper. Ryan has a real short piece. And he said, it's not, Joe Biden just yanked away stimulus checks from 17 million Americans. And he points out Biden repeatedly promised to pass $2,000 stimulus checks if Democrats won. After they did, they argued that $2,000 really meant $1,400 in addition to the $600 that had already gone out in the December rescue package. Whether that is true or not, now Biden is inarguably breaking his promise. Under pressure from moderate Senate Democrats, he has reportedly agreed to cut down the formula under which the checks will be sent out. And then he mentions the formula again. I'm not going to go over it for the nth time here. The $1,400 promise clearly implied, Ryan says, at least that the checks would go out according to the previous formula used under Trump. But now singles making between $80,000 and $100,000 and couples making between $160,000 and $200,000 will get nothing. Big fat goose egg. The Washington Post Jeff Stein reports that roughly 17 million people who previously got checks now will not. The supposed justification here is that moderates want the aid to be more targeted, quote unquote. But in fact, this formula is horribly inaccurate because the income data the IRS will use is from the year before the pandemic, unless people have already filed their taxes. And by the way, if your income decreased in 2020, you should do that immediately. The formula is therefore doubly wrong. There are no doubt millions of people who have lost jobs and should qualify but won't, and a smaller number that have gotten raises and shouldn't qualify but will. And this change will only save a pitiful $12 billion. The survival checks are one of the most popular government programs in history. Polls have them at something like 4-1 approval. Moderation, quote unquote, for Senate Democrats apparently means breaking their party's promises in the service of unpopular, pointless actions that make their president seem less generous than Donald Trump, says Ryan Cooper. And next, would a day be complete without checking up on what Dave Dayen has to say? Let's get to it. Says the Senate has until the end of next week, remember tomorrow's Thursday, to meet the deadline for when unemployment benefits for about 11 million people extended in the last COVID relief package began to phase out. That has become the deadline for the American Rescue Plan. Senate Democrats are gradually piecing together their version of the ARP that the House sent over. The first votes could come today, and the bill is going to pass, Chuck Schumer promised. Dave says, I wouldn't expect too many changes from the House bill, which in the interest of keeping this at top of mind, will give a fully eligible family of four between $7,600 and $8,800 in cash benefits over the course of 1 year, with $5,600 up front. Again, I don't see that. A fully eligible family of four, let's say the children are under 6, that's $5,600 up front, and $300 a month for each of the children is another $7,200. I make that $12,800. Okay, and if those children were between 6 and whatever the upper limit is, 17 or 18, okay, or whatever that is, there would be $1,200 less. So it would still be $11,600. And then Dave points out, with the glaring exception of the minimum wage increase. And he cites an article from the New York Times yesterday. He says it's completely in the hands of the presiding officer of the Senate to decide what's germane for a budget reconciliation bill. And he cites the Brunig article that we discussed earlier to decide what's germane for a budget reconciliation bill. So this reflects Democrats stopping that wage hike themselves, though they want to put it on the parliamentarian doing their work for them. Beyond that, there were three areas of interest for moderate Democrats: eligibility thresholds for the direct payments, the federal boost on employment insurance, and the $350 billion fund for state and local governments. The first two negate each other. The whole point of tightening the eligibility on the checks, which is based on a faulty economic analysis, is to better target relief at those who need it. So you're also going to reduce weekly unemployment payments from $400 to $300? He says that's the most targeted relief in the bill. This is clearly just purple and red state Democrats being stupidly contrarian for the folks back home in a deeply damaging way, but it was so contradictory that nothing much came of it. A report out this morning from Fox News suggests no change to the unemployment boost and a minimal change to the phase-out checks, saving little money, but screwing over some people who got partial check money in previous bills, the 17 million people we're talking about. There's one requirement in the bill, that it come in under the $1.9 trillion threshold, and more progressive Democrats want to extend unemployment benefits to the original place Biden had them at the end of September. The House chopped off a month to make room for a multi-employer pension fix. This could have been resolved by simply making the threshold larger to account for congressional prerogatives, but instead we're playing priorities against one another. Sigh. It was Dave who sighed. It wasn't me. Anyway, let's talk about that third piece, the state and local government fund. The New York Times chart is getting a lot of attention. It's the latest in a series of pieces of evidence showing that revenues were not as bad as forecast for states in 2020. I should note this part, as written, reflects changes to tax revenue, which is not the only revenue state governments take in. There are user fees and licenses and whatnot. But I've seen broader studies of total state revenues that are similar, says Dave. First off, there's a lot of variance here. Generally speaking, states with heavy oil production or large tourism industries got hammered, while others persevered. States reliant on sales rather than income taxes are also doing badly. Furthermore, these are state revenues. Local revenues, which are more reliant on sales taxes and business fees, are not shown here. Nearly half of the $350 billion allocation is intended for local governments. I'm thinking about more untaxed grocery sales than taxed restaurant sales, and waivers of fees for struggling businesses. Those local revenues could be in worse shape. But the bigger issue is that, well, I've seen plenty of estimations of state revenues. There are none referring to state costs. Keep in mind that states still have had to fund large-scale testing campaigns since last March and large-scale vacation campaigns since December. They've had to manage social distancing and sanitation in all government buildings and facilities. They've paid for hazard pay in some cases. They have occasionally borne costs of setting up mobile hospital units or other means to increase capacity in the healthcare network, to the extent that education facilities have been upgraded and online learning systems set up at a moment's notice. That too was a public cost, though probably at the local level. There was some dedicated money for this purpose in the CARES Act, $150 billion for increased COVID-related costs, but that may not have necessarily reflected everything the states have had to bear during this emergency. Granted, there have also been reductions in cost. School bus drivers haven't been needed, for example, or state park rangers in some cases, or other social distancing related jobs. As we return to in person instruction and get back to normal, these costs come back, by the way. But I haven't come to the greatest cost center during the crisis: social services. The federal government is picking up some costs for increased in Medicaid, but there are a wide array of social programs, at least in the states that try to assist their poorest residents, that have skyrocketed in cost over the past year. So, in other words, revenues were flat, but costs were likely to be a fair bit higher and will continue to be as long as vaccination campaigns and special procedures to prevent spread are in place. I don't think there's much of an argument to cut this money given those circumstances. That said, there are tweaks that could be made. Some Senate Democrats are talking about devoting some of the $350 billion to public investment on broadband or hospitals. There is some investment in this package, and there should be more, I think. All of the $130 billion school fund should go toward top-notch ventilation in every school in America. And with money fungible, it would save states from having to do the upgrades. In addition, you could see the money dribbled out in a longer time frame, so states would have to certify the ongoing need. I wouldn't necessarily want to see that, but it could happen. What absolutely needs to happen is a, quote, maintenance of effort clause, so red states don't take this money and pour it into tax cuts. Kansas is already thinking about this. That should absolutely be disallowed. If the state of Kansas can't find a worthwhile project to spend on, they can give the money back. In fact, I have an idea for them. Kansas is 42nd among states in vaccinations of at least one dose to their population and 39th in percentage of supply used. Maybe spend on that. Maybe spend on that, says Dave. Yep. A well-taken column, okay, as usual. And finally, maybe a piece of good news from the standpoint of fighting, continuing the fight over things. Indivisible launches for the People Project to, quote, unrig our democracy and make it work for all. This was by Brett Wilkins, a staff writer at Common Dreams. It's also today. So all these things were quite current. In the wake of its second guide for grassroots organizing, Indivisible, a practical guide for fixing our democracy, the Indivisible movement recently announced the launch of its For the People Project, which it calls a campaign to push key senators and members of Congress forward on critical reforms. Quote, to dislodge the entrenched power of the wealthy, white, conservative minority, we need to fix the broken Senate, unrig our courts, and take away McConnell's scythe as the legislative Grim Reaper by eliminating the grim Jim Crow filibuster, unquote. They explain this on their website. Quote, all of this can be done with simple legislation passed by Congress on a majority vote, signed into law by President Joe Biden, unquote. The goals for the People Project are making Washington, D.C. a state by passing H.R. 51, expanding voting rights, fighting corruption, and building a more participatory electoral process by passing H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and ending the Senate filibuster. Indivisible calls the three bills, quote, the cornerstones of the necessary reforms we need to unrig our democracy and make it work for all. The group is calling on all concerned citizens to contact their members of Congress and ask them to vote yes on the measures. The House is set one on Wednesday. That was today, of course. And and some tweets from Ezra Levin giving links to Indivisible and descriptions of the For the People project. In spite of these objectives, in service of these objectives, Indivisible says it is spending $330,000 on digital and radio ads in the home states of Senators Kyrsten Sinema and Mark Kelly, Senator Joe Manchin, and Senator Angus King. In the coming weeks, I think maybe they ought to spend some money on Sheldon Whitehouse either. Sometimes he's awfully strange. Okay. In the coming weeks, Indivisible will also spend $75,000 on billboards targeting key senators, $35,000 on full-page newspaper ads, and $46,000 on support for grassroots activists, including producing American flags with 51 stars in support of D.C. statehood. In a statement Wednesday announcing the new campaign, Megan Hatcher Mays, director of democracy policy for Indivisible, said that, quote, grassroots activists are energized and focused on taking advantage of the new democratic trifecta and doing the urgent work necessary to heal our democracy and build a more representative government. But we can't do anything until we get rid of the filibuster. Right. Quote, my Republicans have had the opportunity to support structural democracy reforms, unquote, Hatcher Mays continued, quote again, but they won't, because they're quite pleased with the status quo, which insulates them from political consequences, despite their policies being historically unpopular, and grants them the ability to rule over the majority of Americans, despite they're regularly receiving tens of millions of fewer votes than Democrats, unquote. This Congress might be the last chance Democrats have to fix our democracy before state Republicans ram through new voting restrictions and anti-democratic laws at every level of government. We're holding back nothing as we work to make D.C. the 51st state, protect the rights of voters, and root out corruption in our government. Okay, I would also advise working to make Puerto Rico the 52nd state as well if they want to become the 52nd state, because we sure could use them inside of the Union too, to try to restore some of the balance that we have. And one more thing, H.R. 1, H.R. 4, and H.R. 51. Well, I guess H.R. 51 is not going to need this, but H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 are going to need the exceptions clause from Article 3, Section 2, because you don't want the Supreme Court of the United States subjecting these bills to judicial review, not with a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. So it's just a small little clause that should be added to both. The exceptions clause prohibiting the appellate courts of the United States from having jurisdiction over H.R. 1 and H.R. 4. And if the Republicans don't like it, too bad. Too bad. Now, this looks good to me because Indivisible is talking about billboards, ad campaigns in the states of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And that is important. And by the way, if they do Angus King in Maine, they better also do Jean Shaheen in New Hampshire, because she seems to be floating around on some kind of airy notions lately. So, please keep that in mind, Indivisible. I wanted to end on that because it's kind of a high note of people who intend to fight for something. Let's hope I'm right about what Bernie can do. I still don't know, okay, if I am. I still don't know if the bill is sitting in the Budget Committee. I don't know whether the House bill will be sent to the floor by Bernie and whether there will be that floor vote or not in relation to keeping the minimum wage in the bill. So, back to me now and back to your comments. Looks like I'm getting comments right from the beginning today. I didn't have this weird cutoff that I have sometimes. And we're going back to (909) to 911, the No Excuses Pact. Okay, says Steve Gonzo, is the dig better? That was at 9/11. Terry Burke says, serious new COVID-related smoking threat discovered by researchers. This is from Smart News. And Steve Gonzo said he passed. Kay says, so sorry, honey. Steve says, House of Representatives cancels work amid QAnon conspiracies around March 4th. Lonadell says, thanks. Evelina says, thank you, Kay. Kay says, they're working late tonight, though, in passing the voting laws. Well, that's the Senate. Oh, no, that's the House. No, you're right, Kay. Kay says, YW Evelina Pont. And Steve Gunson says, sorry about your dog, Steve. Oh, I'm sorry, that was said, okay, by Evelina, who said, Steve Gonzo, sorry about your dog, Steve. Is that him in your profile pic? And Steve says, yep. Yes, I'm very sorry about that, Steve, also. I didn't realize that you were talking about your dog first. Terry Burke says, Trump served with civil rights lawsuit for January 6th insurrection. Great. That was a very good thing to do. A civil rights lawsuit. That was wonderful. Holly Horn says, hello. Hello, Holly, and welcome. Steve Gonzo says, Evelyn says, Steve Gonzo, Kay says, still miss my little Sasha. And she's still my profile pic, so I could see her all day, every day. Had her 14 years. Holly Horn says, means testing. Yeah. Ridiculous means testing instead of testing after the fact, which is what they through the taxation system. That's what they should be doing. Evelina says, Terry says, Biden approves cutting the number of people eligible for a third stimulus check. Read it on the web, tap here. Well, I'll be reading it to see if they know what they're talking about, but if the change hasn't been made in the bill, it's not there yet. And Lana says, but what is a vote-a-rama? Well, a vote-a-rama is when people have free reign to submit amendments, and they all get floor votes in this exciting process where they're going through, when they had the vote-a-rama in the House, I think they voted on something like 250 bills, up and down votes on 250 bills. Most of the things that were passed were ridiculous, and in the Senate, the same thing, is going to be passed. But in the first votorama in the Senate, something potentially dangerous for Social Security was passed. It got actually 20 Democratic votes because it sounded fiscally responsible, and the Democrats wanted to play at being fiscally responsible because they're still fiscal idiots. So therefore, they passed an amendment then, which hopefully they've learned more about now and will defeat, but it was based on a Romney proposal that could, after a decade have passed, have forced cuts on Social Security and other entitlement programs. Now, if there is anything that should be out of order in a reconciliation bill, it's a provision that could possibly impact Social Security down the line, because impacting Social Security with a reconciliation bill is something that's supposed to disqualify the provision from such a bill, according to the Byrd Rule. Steve Gonzo said, his urn will say Buckeye, world's best dog. What is grief, if not love persevering? From by WandaVision. Kay says, I agree, Steve. And Lana says, I love Gunnels, but it's tough to get him to reply. I know. And he didn't reply for this one. Lana says, thanks, Mark, for retweeting. Kay says, after I lost my 20-plus year hubby Scott to cancer, Sasha was all I had left. Now that she's gone too, I have no one left. I understand better than most, Steve. Hey, Kay, I thought you had children as well. And Solana says, oh, gee, are you on Twitter? How about you, Hadley? My handle is @OrganicFanatic5. And Lana says, Matt B drives me nuts. Well, he might have driven you nuts, but you got to admit, that was a clear column about the parliamentarian, wasn't it? Steve Gonzo said, I still have cute kitty. She's a mess too, keeps crying out, searching for him. For Buckeye, that is, of course. Evelina says, Kamala can stay home then. Let Leahy come through for the American people. Well, Kamala should probably stay in some adjoining room so she can come in right after the vote and chair it, because once the point of order is done, shortly thereafter, they're probably going to be voting on the bill. I don't know. I shouldn't say that because I don't really know how shortly thereafter. But they might be voting on the bill the same day. So if Kamala wants to be there for the voting on the bill, she's going to have to be the presiding officer then, when she'll be necessary to break the tie. Because if Leahy is the presiding officer and she is not there, there's no one there to break the tie, because Leahy is a senator and will cast his Senate vote. He'll create the 50-50 tie. But Kamala has to be there to break the 50-50 tie in favor of the bill. Now, you may ask, will she vote in favor of the bill if there's a 50-50 tie, if it has the minimum wage provision in it? You bet she will. If the minimum wage provision is wrapped in there, she's not going to defeat that bill with the stimulus checks for the American people and with all the rest, all the other goodies for the American people in it. It's one of the keys to Biden, to Democrat success in 2022 and 2024. Biden needs this bill. He needs it as much as every other Democrat needs it. Now, he may be able to pressure some of the other Democrats by playing around with the minimum wage thing in it and the eligibility provisions in it. But if they come to the final vote with those things still surviving, there's no way Biden is going to fold on that vote or have Harris fold on that vote. They're going to vote for it. Kay says, I can't live with cats anymore. At about age 35, I became as allergic to cats as anyone can be. They gave me asthma attacks. I always had cats, though, before then. I'm okay if they're outside cats, but not in the house. Kay says Biden Harris thinks we are all stupid. Yep. Evelina says, my Frida never went outside. Died in my arms. I cried a river. Holly Horn says, Alana, I try to avoid Twitter. Smile. Kay says, I know the feeling. I asked for the vet to put me to sleep so I could go with Sasha. Holly Horn says, yes, the parliamentarian is advisory. Terry Burke says, so that's the better strategy then, Dr. F. Now the best strategy is to do the best you can now to get the minimum wage passed in this bill, to get it to a floor vote with Sinema and Manchin on the spot. If they're on the spot, then believe me, they'll cave. They're not going to vote against this bill. It's got too many goodies in it for their people. Too many ads Republicans can run against them coming off this bill if they vote against this bill. So that's the better strategy. Then, if that succeeds and they get this bill through, then they move to H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 and H.R. 51. And if they have it ready, H.R. 52. And when they start getting trouble on that bill, that's when they activate the nuclear option to get rid of the filibuster, to open the way to all the other legislation they need and obviate the need for another reconciliation bill. I know they have plans for another reconciliation bill. I know Bernie has already started work on another reconciliation bill. I'm sure House people have started work on a second reconciliation bill. But they shouldn't do that. They need to get rid of the filibuster and pass H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 to stop the Republicans from poisoning the election of 2022. In other words, the Republicans have got to know that if they keep going along with this combination voter suppression and Trump strategy, they're going to lose in 2022 and they're going to lose in 2024. It's the only way to get the party away from Trump. And even then, it's going to be real difficult. Evelina says if she doesn't, a lot of people will absolutely hate her, especially if they dislike her already. I don't think she cares much if people dislike her, as long as Biden and the party likes her. But on the other hand, this is going to be on Biden too. Holly Horn said, those are the rules, Robert's rules. Those are the Senate version of Robert's rules, yes. Holly Horn says, I don't believe AOC will challenge Schumer. Maybe not, but if Schumer is terrible enough, she may challenge him. We'll see. Kay says, Biden and Harris are making their way out of power with this mess. Shake my head. Evelina says, but they're oblivious, or is it, but they don't care. Actually, they're trimmers. They think that this bill will be so overwhelmingly popular that if they got 12 million people mad at them, because it's 12 million people, it's 17 million people who are deprived, but 5 million are non-voters, they're children. So there are 12 million people, who'll be angry at them. So they probably figure if 12 million people out of 330 million are angry at us, we can get over that if we can strengthen the case for this bill getting through Congress. If we can bring these senators around by compromising on this, maybe it's worth pissing off the 12 million people. That's probably what they're thinking about. In terms of the minimum wage, they're probably thinking about people are going to be a lot angrier about the minimum wage, but on the other hand, we'll get really rewarded from our donors, and maybe that will protect us against scads and scads of money Donald Trump is going to have. Maybe that's what they're thinking on that. I don't know. But from Dave's outline, Dave Dayen's outline, you can see that this bill is going to be very important for families that fit the eligibility criteria. I mean, this is the main bill that's been passed so far in terms of money given out to families. If you look at the unemployment insurance and you combine it with the full checks for the children, okay, and then the further tax credit rebate checks they'll get on a monthly basis for their children. I mean, $12,800 is a lot of money. $11,600, that's also a lot of money. And they're going to give Biden the credit if they get this money. Okay. And the $400 extra a week, okay, in addition to the unemployment they're getting from other sources, going from now until the end of August, and if they can modify it and get it back to the end of September, okay, you know, it's even more money that they can look forward to in terms of help from the federal government. For people making up to $75,000, that's a lot of money. So they figure the public will forgive them a few sins if they get them all this money. And they think they can play along with the minimum wage. They think that they can, if they need to, in order to shore up their popularity, they can still go after the minimum wage. In other words, if they have to get rid of the filibuster anyway to pass H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, then a standalone vote can be scheduled for the minimum wage, and it can be passed with the 50+1 votes, especially with 66% of the country in favor of raising the wage. So they have moves to make. Their primary thing now is to get this bill through with most of it intact. That's what Harris and Biden are looking at, and to get it through on time by March the 15th. But see, the leverage changes. If Bernie can keep the minimum wage and the eligibility provisions in this bill when it goes to the floor, and he can lead the movements to defeat the changes Biden wants on the floor, if he can do that, then the leverage changes. And by the time the bill gets to Harris, she has to face, this is the bill. And the easiest way to get the reconciliation bill, whether it has minimum wage or not, well, it has the eligibility criteria of the House or not, the easiest way to get it through is to rule in favor of the bill, not in favor of the point of order, and then to take the vote to pass it by 51-50. At that point in time, that will be the best thing for the Biden administration to do from their point of view, and that will be what they will do. And they will apologize to their donors, and they will apologize to Sinema and to Manchin and say, look, we couldn't do anything else. You weren't able to get your amendments to the floor to change this bill, or you weren't able to get a majority for them on the floor. You weren't able to get 60 votes on the floor. So there wasn't much that I could do. I mean, once it got to Kamala, it was too late. We had to get the bill passed by the 15th. That was our deadline. We just didn't have time to get the amendments he wanted to see in the bill. That's what he'll say. Steve Gonzo says, breaking, the House has just passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. 220 to 212, just one Republican supported the bill. Those Republicans are skunks, aren't they? Just skunks. Every last one of them, skunks. Evelina says, so maybe they figure hold on to power long enough to make money and go down in history books for starting green transition and buying all the vaccines? Maybe. Kamala, of course, being the first woman president. Evelina says, I'm feeling slightly jaded, laugh out loud. No, you're making sense. That could very well be, Evelina. Terry Burke says, less austerity under the orange fascist buffoon. How can Democrats be so asinine? Social Security people getting checks this time. I don't think there's anything about Social Security expansion in this bill, but that will come in down the line. I mean, again, if they have to get rid of the filibuster to win, if that's the way it's looking, that they have to get rid of the filibuster to win in 2022, they'll get rid of the filibuster. They'll pass H.R. 1 and H.R. 4. Then Social Security expansion can be introduced at any time, and it'll need only 50 plus 1 votes. And people aren't going to vote against the Social Security expansion in that context. Nah. Evelina says, yes, Kay, I believe so. Social Security getting expansion will easily pass the House. Kay says, good, because he's done nothing on expanding Social Security yet, if he ever does. Terry says, it's bad enough Biden did major damage by reneging on the $2,000 promised in Georgia. Yeah, I think he did major damage. And why? Why? There was no reason for that. There was no reason for that. No one in the House wanted him to do that. And only a few people in the Senate wanted him to do that. If he was going to do that, he should have negotiated with the House Democrats, and he should have said, look, I'll make this change, but you got to understand, it's already breaking a promise of mine to lower this to $1,400. And so this is the last compromise that I'm going to make with you. If I make this compromise, you had better not say another word to me about stripping anything else about this bill. And you had better just go along and vote for it. Or I will be in your states campaigning against you in a primary challenge that I will see that you get. Capiche? That is what he should have said to them. If he was going to come down to $1,400. Personally, I wouldn't have come down to $1,400. I wouldn't have given them a frickin' thing, because they did nothing to increase the chances of Democratic success in 2020. Neither one of them did. Terry Burke said, they want to force kids on school so parents will die for profits. It's not that they give a damn about teachers. I know. They don't give a damn about teachers or parents. Old Gringo says, Joe is the best thing that happened to Joe Biden. I'm not in a position to judge that. Evelina says, he plainly stated he would not extend it. He's expanding health care, though. Still doesn't cover everyone, though, if I remember correctly. Yeah, well, of course, he made a promise, right, that he would expand health care, right? He made a promise. Who knows what he's going to do? Who knows if he's going to keep the promise? I mean, he breaks promises, right? All the time. Terry Burke says, Kay says, he said he would when he was campaigning, though. Yep. Kay says, that was the only reason I voted for him, Evelina Pond. Terry says, call Biden caveman, because that's all he's doing. Caveman. Evelina said, I was just thinking he's a dinosaur, laugh out loud. Evelina says, but yes, he caved. Kay says, Rump's Social Security manager is still in charge of Social Security. Terry says, okay, a dino for sure. Terry says, the $500 BI over a year in California was a success. What was the $500 BI over a year in California? I don't think that's much of a test anyway, because it is $500 a year is less than $50 a month, right? But, or is it $500 a month, the BI, over a year? If it was just 500 in BI over a year, that's not much of a test of the whether the basic income is a good policy or not. Okay, I'll tell you the truth. $1,000 a month basic income is not much of a test of whether it would be a success or not, for the simple reason that at $1,000 a month, it would probably take some time before the inflation caused by that, if everyone were to get it, were to manifest itself. Because it's really too little money for that. In other words, $1,000 a month, okay, in New York City, it's going to take some time for that to percolate through to rising prices. Terry says, so if Biden denies that $17 billion demographic COVID relief checks, why can't the rest get the whole $2,000 now? Because I think they already gave away that money to something else. Anyway, Kay says, if they make it through 2022, I hope someone who's more progressive will run against Harris in 24. Yeah, maybe Ro Khanna will run against her. I seem to have the memory that Ro Khanna was born in Philadelphia or something. So he's a Native American, so he can run for the presidency. And Terry Burke says, House approves George Floyd Justice Kane Policing Act here. It's in smartnews.com. Evelina says, yesterday Iran retaliated by bombing the U.S. base in Iraq. We need to keep an eye on this, Dr. Joe. Okay, I will. Lana says, how about we trade D.C. for Texas? Then we can keep 50 stars. Though I would like Puerto Rico if they want to join. Well, there are many, many good Americans who live in Texas, and they may be taking over that state in a year now. So I don't know if I'd be willing to let them go. Terry Burke says that's probably why Caveman is siding with the conservative Nazi GOP. He wants nuclear war. Evelina says Terry Burke, scary as hell, Terry. Kay says Puerto Rico is a GOP heaven. We don't need them as a state. Lana says, I think we need a short take just for Article 3, Section 2. I already have a short take on Article 3, Section 2. Don't I, Lana? I think I do. Look it up. See if I got a short take on Article 3, Section 2. Evelina says, saw nothing in U.S. media. Heard about it from sources outside the states. Terry says, Evelina Pont, I knew it was coming. Biden is just a continuation of bloodlusty HRC and her Warhawk supporters. Kay says they're voting on the Voting Rights Act now. Kay says, looks like HR 1 will barely pass. They're voting now. All the things will barely pass in the House. Why? Because they have a bare majority in the House. but everybody's going to be solid on HR 1. Evelyn says, of course, Kamala needs to be there to break the tie in the Senate, not in the House. She's not the presiding officer in the House. The presiding officer in the House is the Speaker. That is Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Goslin Blockmar says, again, thanks for tonight, Dr. Joe. Agree wholeheartedly with you. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for coming. Troy says, I'm sorry, was getting ready for work and wasn't paying attention to chat. I am at RP Precarian on Twitter, but I haven't even looked at it in over a month. Lana says, okay. Anthony smiles. And Old Gringo says, our Precarian is red Precarian because I'm leaning commie red these days and I am a member of the Precariat. Troy. GOP. And he leaves some icons I can't see in this interface. And Troy says, and the GOP's Democratic allies, he must have given an obscene hand gesture of some sort. Terry Burke said, they better get rid of the filibuster or they'll be stunk by the skunks from now on. I know. They needed to get rid of the filibuster in 2009. They failed then. That's what led to Obama's failure. Of course, he wanted that failure. For his point of view, it wasn't a failure. He went out a president, very popular with the people who were in a position to make him very, very wealthy, which is where he is today. Evelina Ponce says $2,000 a month could make a difference. Might make a difference. Terry Burke said it was $500 a month. Oh, they got $500 a month in a basic income in California? Well, my daughter never told me about that. She lives in California. Who got the $500 per month in California? And when did they get it? And Troy says El Paso to Brownsville. Almost the entire Texas-Mexican border plus Austin is very Democratic. Yeah, I know. Jamie Galbraith is one guy who lives in Austin who's a great American. So, everybody, it's good night time. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the conversation. But thank you for being here. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll certainly be here for my live stream at 9 p.m. Hopefully, I may be able to do some short takes too. But anyway, have a very good night. Kay says low-income people got it in California. Only one city, too, as I remember. So that's not much of a test. And Dolores Pierce says thank you and good night all. And anyway, good night, everybody.